Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. Just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, they do. It's always some random email that pops up, typically an email that I almost pass up because I think that it's something I already have on my spreadsheets or that I've already covered. I got an email from Emily Johnson. Subject line: Second Coming quote by President Monson, General Conference Priesthood Session 2011. Do you have this one? Hello, Jared. First of all, thank you so much for being that person who takes the time out to research and put together actual references that support Second Coming information. It's refreshing to glean from someone who does their own due diligence to sift through things that are either legit or not so much. And then she provides the quote that I want to read. And thank you for your kind words. And yeah, that's what we should all do. Do our best to tie things down to reality and authoritative sources. And if you can't do that, you should really take it with a grain of salt. And if it's making really tall claims, or if it's outside of the gospel, just don't even entertain that. But okay, so we're going to the October 2011 General Conference. The name of the talk is Dare to Stand Alone. This is President Thomas S. Monson, and in that year, he was president of the church. I had no idea that he said this in General Conference. Lest we at any time feel inadequate for the tasks ahead of us, brethren, may I share with you a statement made in 1987. We're going to get back to that. 1987. By then church president Ezra Taft Benson, as he addressed a large group of members in California. Said President Benson, quote, and I know that if you're watching this channel, you've probably heard this before. The interesting thing is that this is being repeated. It was first said by one president of the church, and now it's being repeated in 2011 by another one. And you're going to be surprised where the rest of this video goes. Quote, in all ages, prophets have looked down through the corridors of time to our day. Billions of the deceased and those yet to be born have their eyes on us. Make no mistake about it. You are a marked generation. For nearly 6,000 years, and let's just pause right there. I want to point out, I have a quote from President Holland, President Nelson, and President Oaks, where they've changed that language, where they no longer say it's almost been 6,000 years or we're still within 6,000 years. They've said it's been more than 6,000 years. That's important because if we're thinking about the seals from the book of Revelation, each seal corresponds with this 1,000-year period, and the second coming happens at the beginning of the last 1,000 years, the 7th 1,000 years. For nearly 6,000 years, God has held you in reserve to make your appearance in the final days before the second coming of the Lord. Some individuals will fall away, but the kingdom of God will remain intact to welcome the return of its head, even Jesus Christ. While this generation will be comparable in wickedness to the days of Noah, when the Lord cleansed the earth by a flood, there is a major difference this time. It is that God has saved for the final inning, and you know what, I should have put that in red. Let's just do it right now. Let's be thorough. For the final inning, some of his strongest children who will help bear off the kingdom triumphantly, end quote. And then President Monson, yes, brethren, we represent some of his strongest children. Ours is the responsibility to be worthy of all the glorious blessings our Father in heaven has in store for us. Now, what I researched is, so President Monson, he said that this came from an address in 1987, and that's true, it did. But the original address, the very first time that I know of that Ezra Taft Benson shared this, was all the way back in on March 4th, 1979, in a talk called In His Steps. It was a BYU devotional. And the order was a little bit off because probably in that second address, Ezra Taft Benson rearranged his talk. But I want to read what he said in purple, the parts that weren't included in President Monson's excerpt, because back in 1979 he said this too. Every previous gospel dispensation has drifted into apostasy, but ours will not. It's important to understand because you have some people that entertain the idea of special prophetic figures like Samuel the Lamanite that are going to come from outside the church and correct the church. Do not listen to those people. The next purple part, and that is where you come in. For you are the generation that must be prepared to meet your God. That's a little bit more on the nose. After saying that this generation has been saved for the final inning, and that is where you come in. For you are the generation that must be prepared to meet your God. He's referring to the second coming, obviously. And then after that, this is the part where he says, make no mistake about it. You are a marked generation. And then there's this other purple part. There has never been more expected of the faithful in such a short period of time as there is of us. Okay, now there's more. There is surprisingly more. The reason why I'm making this video is not just to point out the fact that President Monson repeated this, but that it's been repeated many other times that I didn't realize. And it makes me think back to just recently when Elder Neil L. Anderson was speaking at a BYU Idaho devotional. Oops. I still got to fix the formatting on this particular quote, but this was February 22nd of this year. And his talk was all about President Oak's first public address as president of the church, which was at a BYU devotional. And this particular devotional speech by Elder Anderson, I feel like it's one of the biggest hints we've been given about the second coming and the timing of the second coming. Let me just show you really quick. Let's do a quick recap. At the beginning of the talk, he says, this warning was given in April 2018, President Nelson's first general conference address after becoming the president of the church. He spoke of the conditions of our world with a very solemn warning that was repeated by President Oakes 12 days ago. And I know many of you know these words. They've been repeated many times. Here they are. In the coming days, it will not be possible to survive spiritually without the guiding, directing, comforting, and constant influence of the Holy Ghost. He points out that both President Nelson and President Oakes saying this at the beginning of their presidencies is like two bookends. That's a concept that we've entertained on the channel before he said this. It was amazing that he said that. And then later on, he says, nearly 30 years ago, President Henry B. Eyring, who was then a member of the Quorum of the 12, said something in General Conference that I have not forgotten. Here's what he said. One of the ways we may know that the warning is from the Lord is that the law of witnesses, authorized witnesses, has been invoked. When the words of the prophets seem repetitive, that's what we're focusing on in this video. When the words of prophets seem repetitive, such as, you are a marked generation, you must prepare to meet your God, this is the final inning, things like that. When the words of the prophet seem repetitive, that should rivet our attention and fill our hearts with gratitude to live in such a blessed time. The word, end quote, from President Eyring, Elder Anderson. The words that have been pressed upon my mind are the law of authorized witnesses, when repetitive, should rivet our attention. And then if that wasn't enough, toward the end of his talk, he said, Who else in the first presidency or Quorum of the 12 has spoken about the parable of the 10 virgins recently? Interestingly, Elder Bednar has spoken about the 10 virgins 3 times in General Conference. Elder Rasband spoke about the parable just 3 years ago, and Elder Renlund spoke about it just last April. With President Oak's invitation and 3 apostles explaining the principles of this important parable, I have thought again about President Eyring's message of the law of authorized witnesses. I found myself riveting my attention on this parable. And then he himself includes this parable in his talk, so he can add himself to the list. But as an apostle, he's showing us, look, the brethren keep repeating this. Maybe we should pay attention to it. And we know that parable has everything to do with the second coming. That's why I feel like this is one of the biggest hints. You have an apostle saying, look, if they keep saying it, you should probably pay attention. You should rivet your attention. And look, I'm going to repeat it to you. And so he goes through and he takes excerpts from some of those talks and he includes it in his own talk from Elders Rasband, Renlund, Bednar, and President Oaks. And then after doing that, he says, and once again, President Eyring, quote, one of the ways we may know that the warning is from the Lord is that the law of witnesses, authorized witnesses, has been invoked. When the words of prophets seem repetitive, that should rivet our attention and fill our hearts with gratitude to live in such a blessed time. So, going back to President Monson, president of the church, repeating something that President Benson said when he was president of the church about making no mistake about who you are, a marked generation, that these are the final days before the second coming, that this is the final the final inning. Well, that rivets my attention, but it doesn't end there. So I used Grok, like I usually do, to see if there were any other needles in the many haystacks out there that have to do with this. And there were. Grok pointed to this October 1989 General Conference talk called Stalwart and Brave We Stand by Elder Marvin J. Ashton of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So we have another prophet here, and let's read what he said. I thank God continually for the young men and young women of this generation. I firmly believe that the finest young people that have ever lived in the history of the entire church are with us today. So this is already echoing what President Ezra Taft Benson said. The great majority are pioneers on the move in righteousness and truth. Most of our youth are true to the faith despite conditions of the day and are avoiding the temptations and subtleties of misconduct that tempt them on every hand. What a joy it is to reflect upon the fact that we have more young men and young women than ever before serving in the mission field today. Young people who have a great commitment and are enjoying unusual success. I'm actually going to go ahead and skip down. And then he says, I share with you a statement of President Benson made to a gathering of youth in Southern California after he became president of the church. And then he repeated this quote, final days before the second coming, the final inning. You are the generation that must prepare to meet your God. Make no mistake about it. You are a marked generation. And then he included more, but we don't need to read all the rest of it again. Okay. So in the first place, I didn't know that what Ezra Taft Benson had said had been repeated except for one time by himself. It's pretty well known that this impacted a lot of people, that there were people that were in attendance that were like, I think he just told us that we're going to witness the second coming. I think a lot of people are familiar with this quote, but at least for my part, I didn't know that it was repeated so many times. And this isn't all. I found it repeated in these different church manuals. For example, the Young Women Manual 3. This is from 1994. We also have it in Book of Mormon Gospel Doctrine Teacher's Manual from 1999, right here. And then the Old Testament Gospel Doctrine Teacher's Manual, 2001, here. And the wording varies a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't include all the main parts that we're focusing on, but they repeat at least some of it. Old Testament Student Study Guide from 2002, right here. Make no mistake about it, you are a marked generation. Old Testament Teacher Resource Manual, 2003. And right here, final days before the second coming, the final inning. You are the generation that must prepare to meet your God. Make no mistake about it, you are a marked generation. Okay, so what I have done is I didn't add what was in these different church publications, but I'm thinking that maybe I should, because I want to remember this. I need to be able to remember it and not just in my head. That's why I have my spreadsheets. So I might add all those to my spreadsheets, but I definitely added the quote from President Monson and the one from Elder Ashton. Is that what it was? Marvin J. Ashton? Yeah, that's right. So I've added those, but there's more. Okay, so the first instance of this being said that I know of, March 4th, 1979, like we talked about. It was a BYU devotional. I've decided to add topics, this is my spreadsheet called Quotes Rising Generation. It's very similar to my Quotes Second Coming spreadsheet, but I felt like I needed to break this off and have it be its own spreadsheet to be able to illustrate certain things with the columns over here to the right, which I'm not going to do in this video. Also to see which generations are being spoken to when, these prophets and apostles are speaking. In this case, it was essentially the end of the baby boomers and the beginning of Generation X, the marked generation, the ones that must prepare to meet their God. So I've added 3 columns. This will be similar to the Second Coming quote spreadsheet. These are topics, because I need to be able to easily scroll through here and compare quotes to other quotes. So for example, I have marked generation, I've got make no mistake about it, and then sports analogy, because I had already noted up until this point that there have been multiple Second Coming quotes that use sports analogies. So we have this one as far as sports go, the final inning, and then mark generation, and then make no mistake about it. The next time that we see a sports analogy, it's from Elder Neil A. Maxwell. It's not strictly a sports analogy, but I think it mostly is. So this is March 1983 Ensign. Furthermore, whether you realize it or not, you are a generation drenched in destiny. If you are faithful, you may be part of some of the winding up scenes for this world, and as participants, not mere spectators. So I kind of think he's using a sports analogy there. You can be spectators of other events other than sports, but I think it's a sports analogy, and it seems similar to President Ezra Taft Benson's speech or his talk about the Mark generation in the final inning. So I think that he's riffing off of that. I really do. Going on to the next one, we have Ezra Taft Benson again. This is April 1987, and this is the one that President Monson was quoting from, was this version of his talk. Okay. Later on, we have the one from Elder Marvin J. Ashton, September 30th, 1989. Okay. And then the next one, we have the President Thomas S. Monson citation of that, or reference to that. October 2nd, 2011. And then we have something similar from President Nelson, at least as far as make no mistake about it goes. And I think he took that language from President Ezra Taft Benson. I'll show you why in just a second. But this is his talk called Becoming True Millennials. It was a BYU Hawaii devotional, January 10th, 2016. And let's see, let me move this up. Okay. This is one of those quotes that I feel is pretty on the nose about a specific generation. In this case, millennials. Okay. He's talking to, at this point, the millennials are like in college. A bunch of them are still college students. So it's not necessarily the youth. But he says, when I pray about you and ask the Lord how he feels about you, I feel something far different from what the researchers say. Spiritual impressions I've received about you lead me to believe that the term millennial may actually be perfect for you, but for a much different reason than the experts may ever understand. And then I'm going to skip down. A true millennial is a man or woman whom God trusted enough to send to earth during the most compelling dispensation in the history of this world. So now it's starting to sound like the Ezra Taft Benson quote about reserving a faithful generation, or, maybe several generations for the second coming. A true millennial is a man or woman who lives now to help prepare the world, or the people of this world, for the second coming of Jesus Christ and his millennial reign. Make no mistake about it. The same words used by President Ezra Taft Benson. Make no mistake about it. You were born to be a true millennial. Okay, so let's remind ourselves what he said, what Ezra Taft Benson said originally. Make no mistake about it, you are a marked generation. Right? The generation that must prepare to meet their God. And President Nelson said, make no mistake about it, you are true millennials. Which, well, that's a generation. Like, if you're going to live in the millennium, you'll be meeting your God. So I think it's the same thing. I think he's thinking about President Benson's quote in this talk. But not just that. If we go up to right here, I don't know exactly when this was, but it was in 2022 for FSY. I have the audio recording of this that somebody sent to me. I'm so appreciative of that because, as far as I know, this hasn't been published. There's no hard copy of this. But he said, Heavenly Father knew you would recognize truth, and he knew you would be willing to help carry the message of Jesus Christ and his gospel to others around the world. Using a baseball analogy, so there's the sports analogy, we are in the last half of the ninth inning. Now, this is fascinating because President Benson was saying that we're in the final inning, but the last half of the ninth inning is the very last part of the game when the home team is up to bat, and they're the last ones that are up to bat, and then the game's over. It's the very, very end of the game. And I might as well hold up my Royals baseball that I got at this game that I recently went to. It was the Kansas City Royals versus the White Sox. Got a baseball. But the last half of the ninth inning, our Heavenly Father and his Son chose you to be on their team when the game's on the line. And then he repeats later on, that is his agenda for this final inning. And yeah. And then two more. I'm only going to read one of these because the other one is essentially a repeat of the first. But this comes from Sister J. Annette Dennis, first counselor in the Relief Society General Presidency. This was an amazing talk. Um, Probably not going to read the whole thing, but just I'm going to start reading this first paragraph though. I want to share something with you that I believe, not because of any hard evidence I have, but because I choose to believe what prophets have said. Me too. We're on the same page, Sister Dennis. And because of the deep witness of the Spirit I have each time I'm with members of the church your age. I'll use an analogy. Think about a championship sports competition, such as the final game of the World Cup, um, which, by the way, that's coming to Kansas City this year. We're going to have 6 games that are going to be held in Kansas City, or sorry, or the Super Bowl, or maybe just think about any rivalry game between BYU and the University of Utah, which always feels like a championship game. In the last minutes of that game, the last minutes, if the score is very close, which of his players will a coach put in to increase the team's chances of winning? His best players, of course. Look, you guys, they're all using President Ezra Taft Benson's baseball analogy. And they're all talking about how it's the end. We're almost done with this game, and the best players are being put in. Okay, so in the last minutes of the game, if the score is very close, which of his players will a coach put in to increase his team's chances of winning? His best players, of course. The players he has the most confidence in. He would be foolish not to do that. As covenant sons and daughters of God, you've been sent to earth in the final part of the latter days. So not just the latter days, not just the last dispensation, the final part of the latter days, the final minutes of the championship game between good and evil, when the stakes are higher than they've ever been, when the battle is the most heated it's ever been, because Satan knows he doesn't have much time left. Later on, she doubles down and triples down and quadruples down. His finest team for this final phase, those noble spirits, those finest players. Later, our Father's most trustworthy children would be needed in that final decisive battle. And then you've been sent here to fight the final championship battle between good and evil, and the stakes are higher than they've ever been. You're some of our Father's most noble spirits, his finest team. So it's really clear. This between, well, let's just say the concepts from President Ezra Taft Benson's talk about the Mark generation, the baseball analogy, you must be the ones to prepare to meet your God. Those concepts, either verbatim or just in general, have been repeated much more than what I realized. I have now put it all together. I had kind of a sense of that, but now I've made it more concrete on my spreadsheets, and it's amazing. I'm so happy to have that quote from President Monson. You know, it's one thing if you have somebody other than president of the church say something. I still pay attention if it's a general officer or general authority of the church, but especially when it's the president of the church. So you can think of it like this. We have it from President Monson, or sorry, we have it from President Ezra Taft Benson, and then we have it from President Monson, and then we have it from his successor, President Russell M. Nelson. And for all I know, maybe we'll get it from President Oaks too. We'll have to see. But 3 presidents of the church have repeated this. 3 presidents of the church have repeated this. The law of witnesses, authorized witnesses. When the words of prophets seem repetitive, that should rivet our attention. So, thank you for the email, Emily Johnson. I really appreciate that. I thank all of you for taking the time to send me messages. I can't get to them all, and I apologize for that. I do have to screen it myself because if I was to enlist the help of somebody else, even if it was my wife, they may not know what I'm looking for. They may have seen this email and been like, no, it's from 2011. Like they're not on the same page with me. I need to screen the emails. So I'm sure I've missed many gems. I'm doing the best that I can. But thank you, Emily. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.